Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back John QUELCH.
Thanks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to run a very short panel here prior to the lunch hour. We're talking here about sustainable, inclusive growth, how to transform investment into sustainable growth. We have a record recently in Africa, as we heard earlier, of a doubling of GDP in the last 10 years, and yet has that translated itself into employment, into other indicators of sustainable growth. So to help us on this issue, I'm going to first of all invite the Chief of Staff to His Excellency, the President of Gabon. On my left, Maixent ACCROMBESSI NKANI, to start us off. Give us your thoughts, please.
Hello, Mr. QUELCH. As we're talking about inclusive development, I would like to include all the audience, majority French-speaking, and if you permit, I'd rather speak in French.
Please.
Bonjour, Monsieur QUELCH.
Good morning. It is a great opportunity for us to be able to speak here about the question regarding the difficulties to reconcile problems of development, problems of aspiration from population in front of poverty, need for infrastructure, health, education, while preserving the environment without destroying and keeping the environment for the future generation. Gabon is quite specific in that compared to African countries, for more than 10 years now, the growth has been of 5%. The true question is, how can this, despite these rapid growth, how can we still have deficits in terms of water, electricity, poverty, health, and education? This is a true challenge for which, since 2009, His Excellency Ali Bongo, the President of the Gabon Republic, understood the necessity that development is truly crucial, that we cannot keep on creating politics only based on mining industries. As was so far said, mining industries are that specific in a way that they do not create jobs. They do not create jobs, and on top of it, the products are exported, therefore not creating adding value and hence contributing to the revenues not growing. But needs are growing on then, and we do consider that this policy is to be put in place, which includes this vision. Stop this vicious circle, which I was talking about. To do so, we need to implement brave policies, putting in place industries which will not be only mining, but which will add value, transforming environment, favor sectors which, by their mutation, will permit a strong growth of the economy. So all I will say today is that we need to stress the transformation sector so that everything be clear. And to sum up what has been said so far, transformation means a vision, a clearly set vision. It means action will, determination in actions. In one word, to talk about transformation and helping the population, we need a certain number of conditions, because we realized that as deficits keep on staying in water and natural resources, we do have to let a huge part of the population out of the way forward. We need to have people included in growth, not to have, so that we don't come to gaps like we see in Davos summit, to have sustainable politics, to be able to face the needs of population, politics aiming at or fighting against the vulnerability of populations. To do so, we have put in place brave plans and a change in the way we implement things. To come back to the mining industries and extracting industries, I would like to develop the problematic which for Gabon is to move from questions of political implication only based on extractive industries towards a virtuous set of industries based on taking into account our real problems. Let's take the example of oil. We all know that mining industry doesn't create true resources. It does create financial resources, but no resources for growth. Therefore, we want to have a virtuous cycle based on the appropriation of the politics, putting in place taking into account the local context. We decide to select strategically decisions which will go to projects that we can manage. And to be more clear and more simple, let's look at the oil tree in Gabon.
In the 30 minutes, we come back to you after we hear from the others. So Acha, if we could hear from you, Acha LEKE, the director of Mckinsey in Nigeria. What about this issue of the gap between the impressive GDP record of recent years and the other metrics that we find not so impressive on the sustainability side? What do you say? What's going on here?
Yeah, so thank you, John. I mean, as you mentioned, there's a massive gap, right? As we all know, we've grown at 5.5% as a continent for the past 10 years. And let me give you some numbers around that. Despite that, we have only created jobs at a rate of 0.5% per year, right? So we grow at 5.5%. We create stable jobs at a rate of 0.5%, so a big gap. If you think about, 10 years ago, we had about 70 million stable jobs. And a stable job basically is defined as a job for which you receive a regular paycheck. So whether you're a driver or a civil servant or a teacher, that's what a stable job is. Today, we have about 110 million, 120 million stable jobs in Africa out of a population of 1 billion. Now, we looked at this as part of one of the reports we published last year on Africa at Work. And we found some countries were able to grow much faster. Brazil, Thailand, South Korea, we've spoken about these countries today and yesterday. They grew at a rate of 3 to 4 times faster the creation of stable jobs than we have in Africa. And the question is why and what's it going to take? And the fundamental thing, I think the Prime Minister spoke about it as well, is we are focused, and I would argue rightfully so, on sectors that create growth. And the sectors that create growth are different from the ones that create jobs. So because we were not growing 15, 20 years ago, our focus as a continent was on growth. And we really focus on the resources sector that has contributed a third of our growth over the last 10 years. By the way, that's a sector in this period that has actually net destroyed jobs across Africa. So it contributed to a third of our growth, but it destroyed jobs. And we've not focused enough on sectors like the one that the previous panel spoke about on agriculture. And so that is the fundamental question. It's for the right reasons, we focus on driving growth across our continent. We've now accomplished that. The question is, how can we focus on creating jobs? And that's going to require us to look at a set of different sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, retail, trade, those kind of sectors, ones that create a lot of jobs. Put in place the right enabling environment, put in place the right set of financing schemes, as we spoke about, that we heard speak about this morning, and develop the skills, right? But I'm very confident that we're going to get there. It's a question of getting our governments and the private sector to agree that this should be our focus going forward, which I think they agree to now.
Yeah, Acha, which countries seem to have done a better job here? Which are making more strides in terms of sustainable growth than others?
I mean, a number of us just came from Rwanda, right, from the African Development Bank annual meetings, and a number of us were also there for the first time, and we're just blown away. I mean, you hear the stories of Rwanda, and then you go and experience it, and what they have been able to do. And it's President Kagame with his entire team and the country, and lifting people out of poverty. They've done an extremely good job at that. If you look at a country like Nigeria, it's also one country that has not done a good job till recently. But they're starting in the right path, right? The Minister of Finance was talking about how they've created, 1.6 million jobs last year, and they're starting to put in place the right set of incentives and mechanisms. And I think the question is do you have the right plan? I think a lot of our countries have these plans in place, and we can call them by different names with the right visions and plans. But the big constraint is execution. How do you, as government and the private sector, work together to execute against this? And that's what I think is a big bottleneck across many of these countries.
Okay, Zemedeneh, Ernst & Young, manager of Ethiopia. Is there something more to sustainable growth, though, than just the economics? What else is there that is critical to achieving the sustainable growth?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank Richard for inviting me back. Obviously, hopefully I did say something decent last year, so yeah. I'm back. I start from the premise that the Africa growth story is real. So what we're talking about here is how do we sustain that? What are some of the key issues that certainly I see? I see it from the investor's perspective, from the investment banking perspective. There are three things I want to talk about very quickly. One is income inequality, which I think is a big topic. Even in the United States, it's a big topic. The second one is leadership and how it matters for transformation of Africa and the sustainability of the growth. And the third is the role of FDI and as it relates to the private sector. So income inequality. Africa has done a lot, but a lot needs to be done if we're going to sustain the kinds of encouraging growth that we saw. On the one hand, you say, well, we should feel good considering where we came from. But if you look at sort of the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of the gap between the haves and have-nots, 6 out of the 10 most unequal countries in the world are African. So again, we need to address that, the positive being as it is. So there are some measurements. As I said, I work with CEOs and government leaders around Africa. We do transactions for them all the time, especially from the investor's perspective, outside of the extractive resource industry, where if the oil is there, you go there no matter what. If you're in the consumer products, into the manufacturing business, you're investing in textiles and garments, and all the other things that require a broad-based approach to investment, investors are looking at sustainability. And one measure is, is the growth sustainable? Is the have-nots, the social contract between the two sides, is it still there, or is it going to be distracted? So I think income inequality needs to be addressed in Africa, across all countries, really. Some have done a good job, others not. But the second one is leadership. And I know in various forms people have talked about leadership, but again, I want to look at it from the investment perspective, sustaining growth perspective. And I'll give you an example. There's a very direct relationship between good leaders, economic growth. All right? I'll give you two examples on Africa, one offshore. The two countries that I know one is Rwanda, which has done a fantastic job. I know Acha talked about it. A lot of people talked about it. Currently, we've been working with the Rwandese government for the last few months and I have had an opportunity to interact with them. The vision, the determination that they've had is what got them here, and it's no surprise that Rwanda is one of the top performers in the world, not just in Africa. The other country is the one that I know very well, of course, is Ethiopia. Again, it's no coincidence these two countries have been the best performing economies in Africa over the last 10 years. And Ethiopia, for example, has grown by 10.6% average for 10 years in a row. Again, it all boils down to good leadership. If we don't have that, the growth that we see around Africa is not sustainable. And the last point I want to talk about is FDI. FDI is critical to Africa. No country in the world has grown without FDI. I grew up in the US. We've always been quoting investors into, the Chinese grew with quoting Africa. Africa has to do a better job. It's very encouraging. We just released our Africa Attractiveness Survey for 2014 last week. And last year, $52 billion came into Africa. Fantastic. Growth was 12%, sub-Saharan Africa, if we exclude North Africa. However, that's still only 5% of global FDI. So I think we still have a long ways to go to make sure that we have China-like or India-like or Asia-like FDI coming into Africa. The sustainability of Africa, I want to link FDI though to the African private sector. The transformation of Africa will come if we keep building up the African private sector, not just relying on FDI. So one of the solutions we have is make sure that there's linkages between foreign direct investors coming into Africa, partnering with African investors, the domestic African investors. So these are just, I know there's a whole list of things we can talk about, but for me, at least given the limited time that we have, if we focus on these things, income inequality, good leadership, and attracting FDI, link it to the African private sector, I think we'll have a long ways to go for the sustainability of the growth.
All right, thanks, Sam. And our last panelist is Fathallah SIJILMASSI, who is the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Fathallah, the three items that Zem mentioned, do they resonate with you as the three important items here? Poverty alleviation, leadership, and FDI. Are those the three that will drive sustainable growth in Africa?
Yes, John, I totally agree. And as a matter of fact, sorry, I promised to speak in French, so I will do so. Je suis naturellement tout à fait.
I agree absolutely with what I've just heard, of course, but globally, with everything I've heard since I've been here yesterday, in particular, with absolutely, thank you, Richard, for having invited me here, and for I've heard all these excellent analysis since yesterday. So I think that if I had to illustrate what I have to say, I would illustrate them through a triangle, what I call a virtuous triangle. The first angle, it's the one of leadership. I don't think I'm saying anything very innovative when I say that, but I would like to say that this leadership, which is accompanied by a very strong engagement, which has to be accompanied in turn by the monitoring, the following, the evaluation, the assessment, the adjustment, continuous adjustment, because we're living in a world where transformation is extremely rapid. So planification, strategic planification is crucial, not in really imposing things, but strategically speaking, but the capacity of adaptation, of adjusting to the evolution of the different situations, regional and national and international, are crucial. And that's where leadership takes that's where it's really so crucial, leadership. And if you allow me, I would like to say here how admirative I am of what I've seen here in Gabon as far as development, economic and strategic development are concerned, and all my congratulations. And the second angle is the capacity to get people to work together and get the private sector and government and local authorities and NGOs and universities and all these other stakeholders and get them to work together, because at the end of the day, the positive result, success, it's a sigma of all these interactions, pulled, of course, by the strong leadership that I mentioned. So, and of course, this dimension and the private sector in particular, which I want to emphasize here, is fundamental in order to ensure that the system is capable of arriving at the results. And I've heard this here on a number of occasions. This will, and excuse me for saying this, sort of really emphasizing it, this obsession with really wanting to see that there are tangible and concrete results in the field. And the third angle, which maybe responds to it takes up the FDI issue, is regional integration. We are living now in a world where it is important to go beyond our national frontiers and to work in synergy with our neighbors, and of course beyond that in geographical parameters, regional parameters, which are widened. Regional integration, that's easy to say, it's not as easy to implement. The only way of putting it in, it's step by step, and to really build up cooperations, regional cooperations, to regional facts, regional results, and go little by little in order to go faster and faster, but to make sure that you really start small and then ensure that all this goes together. Why is regional integration so strong, so important? It's because it enables the national private sectors and local to really look at the development in a market which is maturing, in a market which is getting bigger. And why do I link that with the FDI? And I absolutely agree with my neighbors just said. It's that the investments, foreign investments, when they're not coming here in an optic which is very orientated towards raw materials, which, of course, in my opinion, that's something that's passed now. They'll accompany and they'll see where the local investors go. They'll follow the local investors and they'll go in the same direction as them, because that is a signal of what is happening in the field. And I'm sorry for going on about my example, because for 3 years I was the director of the Moroccan investment institute. The more Moroccan investments happened in Morocco, the more foreign investments we saw following them. So that's the capacity for every strategy needs to bring these three angles in: political leadership, the implication, the involvement of the different actors all working together, different stakeholders, and then the regional integration, and really built up brick by brick, pragmatically, gradually, but with real results. And it's in that virtuous circle that I believe we'll find the solution to the challenges that we face.
Just at the end there, Fathallah, is the point about invest in your own economy, and that will give foreigners the confidence to invest in your economy. Let's see if we have time for 2 or 3 quick questions before we go to lunch. So does anyone here have a question for the panel? An issue that has not yet been raised by the panel members. Let me just ask then, reflect for a moment on what happened in China with the growth in China. You had high levels of manufacturing employment. The early development of a consumer economy with more rebalancing still yet to be done, but some of the jobs in retail, some of the jobs in the basic service sector are now becoming very much more a part of the employment equation in China. So it's not merely a resource-based growth, it's a growth that's based on broad-based employment. So is there any hope for that kind of growth in Africa? Who would like to respond, please? I know in Ethiopia there have been some very interesting manufacturing investments. Tell us about them.
This is actually what I call the need for what we call migration to industrialization, which is a critical component. It sounds obvious, but somehow we still haven't got it right in Africa. But I'll give you a very good, encouraging example where we see, certainly where I'm based in Ethiopia. The Chinese, the world's largest shoe manufacturer, is a company called Huajian, is setting up a $2 billion facility in Ethiopia to manufacture shoes. $300-400 shoes that sell in the United States are now being manufactured in Ethiopia. So others are following, the textile, the garment industry. So labor-intensive industries, and in our case, electricity is very cheap, 4 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the cheapest in the world. So the migration to industrialization is like a jigsaw puzzle, which is starting to come. You have cheap labor, which is under $80 a month for an average cost, which is 1/10 of what they cost in China. Right. You have cheap electricity. You have all the infrastructure, 5,000 kilometers of railways, and you have the largest airline in Africa based in Ethiopia. So if you have all these elements, a migration to industrialization, like China or like South Korea, could happen. If you don't, then you have your work cut out. So,
yeah, Acha, please.
Because I think what I also want to avoid is, I agree with the migration, but we have seen that in the past where we migrated to resources and our agriculture sector died. Today, agriculture accounts for 50% of all the jobs in Africa. And I think as we migrate, the biggest lever to lift people out of poverty today in Africa is to sort out the agriculture sector. So increasing productivity, increasing yields across all of the commodities, across all of our countries, I think is a fundamental focus that we need to drive across, in addition to migrating to manufacturing.
Okay, Chief of Staff.
Oui, moi je voudrais rebondir sur la question.
Yes, I would like to talk again about the transfer of technologies. Us in Gabon, what do we need? We have the resources. We have the work stuff, which is more or less adapted. We do not have the technology. So the contracts, which in their content, which can both preserve the local content and help the population thereby, and be it for the benefit of the population, and the necessity of including in these contracts everything which helps to modernize the industrial sector through technology transfer. That's a very crucial parameter, which we believe participates in the capacity to transform the added value that we can offer here. And it's on that base that we can grow our resources, grow, and have with a betterment of the general conditions and the parameters of the national economy.
Please. A very brief question.
Merci. Société Sofalga.
So thank you. Société Sofalga, yesterday we talked about agriculture, infrastructure, industry. We need a plan. How can we move forward? Because everybody's talking, everybody's saying you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do that, but that requires means. So we need a plan to go forward, to move forward. So do we start first with agriculture? Do we first start with infrastructure or the industry? All that it costs a lot. It requires huge budgets. So we need a plan, ABC, to go forward. That's my feeling. Thank you. No. Well, as we're talking about agriculture, the case of Gabon, the case of palm oil is something crucial. We didn't choose that by chance. We have, on average, 4 times more revenues than the countries that produce it elsewhere. So the Gabon really has a huge advantage, a huge asset with that. That's something that is acquired. So with regard to the development, the leaders, and we need the leaders need to carry out a study which is both qualitative and quantity, looking at the economic parameters to implement policies which are not submitted to looking at the costs and the demand, but to looking at the offer. So that means that when we decided to do palm oil in Gabon, we knew exactly what we're doing. We knew that we have a workforce which is not that adapted, which is a bit more expensive compared to other places, but we wanted to do it because we know that the number of recipes that we have that can compensate the deficit with regard to other aspects, with regard, for instance, to the high cost of staffing, of employment. But we also chose a specialist partner. It's a partner that can use the comparative advantages of the production of palm oil to do leverage. Today, when you have palm oil which is planted, all investors come. You know that they'll come. So it's not really a question of means anymore. The question of ideas. You have to have ideas, fruitful ideas, ideas that can be looked at. So if I have one piece of advice to give today, it's that with regard to the growing needs of the population and with the growth of the population in Africa, which have real legitimate needs to develop, leaders have a responsibility, a total responsibility. They have the responsibility to produce solutions, not choices that are adapted, through choices which are adapted. that the choices which are through cooperation, but choices which are created by the values that our societies have to offer.
Thank the panel. First of all, lunch will be next door in the marketplace tent. At 3 p.m. Sharp, we will start the task force section of the program. Please make sure that you don't miss that, because that will be one of the highlights, one of the most important aspects of the agenda. And then tonight, of course, we will have the networking and concert with Youssou N'Dour. So thank you very much for staying with us through this elongated program. And please thank the panel as we go to lunch. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.